I'm Alan Greeley, and I love thinking and meditating on Scripture. Another word for it, which we don't use very often, is pondering. When the mother of Jesus heard the shepherds retell the vision of the angels' celebratory singing, the Scripture says Mary treasured up all these things, pondering them in her heart. That alone is my goal with this podcast. I want us to treasure in our hearts what we hear from God and ponder it. It would be an honor to have you listen in and ponder with me. To God be the glory.
You have been so, so good to me.
Ponder with me about how terrific it is that God has spoken and risked his reputation repeatedly through his communication with us. In the last short devotional episode, we talked briefly about the conundrum of not having answers or the frustration that comes from having answers but not understanding why God is doing what he's doing. The text we used was the first chapter of Habakkuk. He was confused why God seemingly wasn't doing anything about the evil that Habakkuk was witnessing in his society, and God comes back, as he always would, and says, I am doing something, and he always is. God is always working behind the scenes, but God also told Habakkuk, you wouldn't believe what I was doing behind the scenes even if I told you. And then God goes on to tell Habakkuk, and guess what Habakkuk says? Yep, I can't believe that's what you're going to do. How could you do that? How could that be your solution? And the solution that knocked the socks off of Habakkuk was that God was going to punish his people using Babylon, a harsh, cruel, merciless nation. And the rest of chapter 1 was Habakkuk expressing that shock and doubt and disbelief that God would use such a cruel nation. Here's where our lesson really begins in this episode. Habakkuk is in such shock of God's answer that chapter 2 of Habakkuk starts with him saying, I'm going to wait and see whether God is going to change his mind or not. Literally, the text says in chapter 2, verse 1, I will take my stand at my watchpost and station myself on the tower and look out to see what he will say to me and what I will answer concerning my complaint. It's the words watchpost and tower that I want you to pay special attention to. Watchposts and towers were used in the ancient world as a lookout station to see if enemies were approaching. This was before the time, of course, of satellite images and whatnot and all the cool technology of today. Many cities, if not all the bigger cities, had these watchpost towers. They would place members of their military within these watchpost towers, and they'd be on the lookout, scanning the terrain to see who was coming. And if enemies were spotted, they could relay the message back to the city, and preparations could be made as quickly as possible for the invasion. With that imagery in mind, I want you to think about what God had just told him. An enemy is coming. The Babylonians, with all of their ferocity and all their strength and with all their conquering thirst, they are coming. And so you can see why Habakkuk would use this imagery. I'm going to go to the watchpost tower, as it were. I'm going to go to the watchpost tower and see if this is true or not. I'm going to go and get on my watchpost tower and see if God has heard my complaint about them being more evil than us and see if God has changed his mind. Surely God is having second thoughts about this. That's the way Habakkuk is thinking right now. Maybe God has heard me and he's having his second thoughts, and I'm going to go take my stand on the watchtower and see how serious God is. And God's response is this. Here's how serious I am, Habakkuk. I want you to write it down. Literally, the next words out of God's mouth are these. Write the vision. Make it plain on tablets. God wasn't having second thoughts at all. God had firmly decided this is what was going to happen. So much so, he tells Habakkuk, get your pen and paper out. Write this down and start spreading this message so that he who reads it may run. God was giving them some time to run from the city, evidently, escape the impending doom that was coming. Whoever reads what you write down has the opportunity to run, and God adds this in verse 3. There's a little bit of time here before this happens. Verse 3 says this, For still the vision awaits its appointed time. It hastens to the end. It will not lie. If it seems slow, wait for it. It will surely come. It will not delay. So God is saying there's a little bit of time, to run, to get out of the city, flee the invasion, but it is coming. It is a sure thing, Habakkuk. It may seem slow, and I'm reminded of what Peter says about the second coming of Christ in 2 Peter 3. It may seem like nothing is happening right now. It may seem slow, but just wait for it. They are coming, and it is a sure thing, and I want you to write it down and start spreading the message. I want us to take a moment and think about how incredible it is that God has written things down at all, that he's communicated at all is remarkable, but that he's written it down is a little extra dangerous. Write it down, God says. Write the vision on a tablet. Make it permanent. There's something dangerous about writing things down, isn't there? Think about court cases, for example, and how often documents are entered into evidence. Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, do you see this document? Did you write this? Did you email that? Did you text this? Did you sign that contract? You see what I'm getting at? There's a danger to putting something in writing. Your name gets put on the line. Your reputation gets put on the line when you write something, sign something, initial something. And I find it absolutely astounding that God has done that. Write it down, he said. God has put his name on the line by writing things down. God has taken quite a dangerous step. He has put his reputation on the line because if God says something and it's false, what does that say about God? If God has written something down and he can't come through, he can't deliver, what then? You see what I'm getting at. This is huge. That God would put himself out there for the testing. And God isn't putting himself out there reluctantly or hesitatingly, almost like, here goes nothing, fingers crossed, I hope I get this right. He is actually inviting the scrutiny. He is inviting us to see his name on the line, inviting us to see his faithfulness, inviting us to see him come through time and time again. Do you remember the story in Isaiah 7 where the invitation to put God's name on the line was most literally extended to an ungodly king? It was Ahaz. God tells King Ahaz to kind of shake his senses, to wake him up spiritually. God told Ahaz, I want you to test me. Pick a sign, any sign at all, Ahaz. Tell me what I can do for you, Ahaz, to prove my faithfulness to you. And Ahaz was too cowardly to pick one. He feigns, respect. I don't want to disrespect God doing that. And God says, he sees through the hypocrisy and he says, fine, I'll give you one. And I'm going to give everybody else one for the ages. A virgin will conceive and bear a son. And they shall call his name Emmanuel. I'm sure you remember that text. But did you remember the context? The context was God putting his name on the line. Test me. Try me. I want to show you my faithfulness. I want to show you I'm worth your trust. And Scripture is stocked full of these instances of God stepping into this dangerous territory, putting his reputation on the line, but even more remarkable than that, proving it, proving his trustworthiness every single time. Write it down. Such a powerful thing. Time and time again, through his written word and putting himself out there for scrutiny, he is showing us that he is the only one worth trusting. And then Habakkuk chapter 2 ends with this contrast between an idol that's mute, speechless, dumb, and the true God of heaven that has spoken. Chapter 2, verse 18 says, What profit is an idol when its maker has shaped it? A metal image, a teacher of lies. For its maker trusts in his own creation when he makes speechless idols. What profit is a God that can't speak? What profit is a God that can't teach, that can't be scrutinized because the God has never spoken before? And then in the next verse, verse 19, the Scripture again mentions this useless piece of wood or stone that is completely silent, can't teach at all, can't inform, can't enlighten, can't predict, can't show wisdom, can't be proven or disproven because it's never said anything. But then in verse 20, the contrast is a little subtle. It's a little subtle in verse 20 by talking about how our attitude should look before Yahweh God, the true God. Here's verse 20. But the Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. Ah, did you catch the subtlety of the contrast? Verse 20 didn't mention God speaking explicitly, and yet it does mention it. The reason why all the earth should keep silence before God is because he's spoken. He's speaking. With an idol, you have to speak for it. You have to fill the idol with messages. You have to put words in its mouth. But not with Yahweh God. He's spoken. He's put himself out there, and the only proper response to a speaking God is keep silence and listen. Let all the earth keep silence before him. Do you catch the subtlety now of the contrast? The muteness of the idol versus a speaking God. And the only proper response to a speaking God who goes to the lengths of putting his reputation on the line by writing it down is silence, a listening silence. Speak, Lord. Your servant hears.
There's no wall you won't kick down, line you won't tear down, coming after me. There's no shadow you won't light up, mountain you won't climb up, coming after me.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you found something to treasure in your hearts and ponder. The song you've heard is Reckless Love, sung by Praise and Harmony on their album, Resurrecting God. May God's face shine on you always.
Oh, God, oh, it